Welcome to the Real News Network. This is Reality Asserts Itself, and I'm Paul Jay, continuing our series of discussions with Sabah Alnasseri, and he now joins us in the studio. Thanks for joining us again.
Pleasure.
And I think I actually finally said your last name correctly for the first time in this series of interviews.
Not for the first time, but yeah.
Better anyway.
Okay.
So the Iranian Revolution in 1979 was like an atomic bomb. I mean, if they want, I don't think the Iranians ever really had a nuclear program, but the Iranian Revolution was like a nuclear bomb going off throughout the whole Middle East.
True.
And then some.
Yeah.
The overthrow of the Shah, removing one of the major pillars of American power in the region. And one of the answers of the Americans to that was instigating Saddam Hussein to start a war with Iran.
Right.
So that's in 1980.
Right.
You're still in high school.
Right.
Talk a little bit about the politics of what was going on with the war, but also how it affected you and your family.
Yeah.
Just let me add to that. It's about 1.2 million people killed in that war.
At least 1.2 million, right? This is the official figure, right? So we can assume that more people were killed, or at least, were affected of the war and died later, not necessarily during these 8 years, right? So you have 1.2 million, at least, were killed on both sides at that time.
And to a large extent orchestrated by people like Donald Rumsfeld
and their chemical weapons, yeah. And, I mean, it is interesting we realized this at that time, that the war, although it was, orchestrated and pushed by the Gulf and the US and so on, was Saddam Hussein against Iran. But actually it benefited Iran too. Because remember, the revolution in Iran, 1979, was not so much Islamic. It was, all segment of the Iranian societies. So the mullahs...
Again, with a very strong Iranian Communist Party.
Exactly. So the mullahs needed actually the war to cement their dominance within the state and outside of the states by appealing to, Iranian nationalism and Shiite nationalism, if you would like, and so they at that time
and martyrdom.
Yes, at that time they used the war to to massacre and imprison all their opponents and so on. And the second thing, just like Saddam Hussein speculated at that time that he would win the war because there is no military infrastructure in Iran anymore after the revolution, the Iranian, the dominant mullah group, speculated that the Iraqi Shiite population would side with Iran and fight against Saddam Hussein. And that's one of the interesting things in Iraq, that the Shiite communities in Iraq actually were Iraqi nationalists and start fighting against Iran rather than siding with Iran. And that's one of the things what Iran was surprised to see the Shiite community siding with the Ba'athists in their war against Iran rather than,
By this time, the Communist Party and the socialists and left had lost its power?
They were totally destroyed, dismantled. The trade union that used to be dominantly communist or controlled by the communists was de facto nationalized, became a state institution, right, and pushed much more in line with the Ba'athists.
Because you would think there would have been an argument like there was in the First World War from the left that Iranian and Iraqi workers shouldn't fight each other and they should turn on their own regimes.
Right.
But there wasn't a force there to do that.
And there's another thing. I mean, I argued long ago against Iraqi communists, friends of mine and so on, when they used to argue that, the Ba'athist regime in Iraq, at least since the 90s and so on, in the 80s and the 90s and so on, they governed qua violence, surveillance and intelligence and so on, fear. You have Kanan McKee in the 1986 writing a book, The Republic of Fear. This is one of the newcons, by the way, in the US, who sided with the Bush administration in 2003. So talking about these things, I said no. The Ba'ath Party has partly legitimacy within Iraq due to the welfare state, due to these social safety networks. So all of a sudden, if you are an Iraqi worker, you find yourself in a position where you have permanent income, you have pension, you have higher wages than before, you have better social standing, because now you are not just a worker, you are a public employee. So what does this mean? And many people underestimated this. What does this mean in class sense? Before, I'll just give you an example, which actually Saddam Hussein used in one of his speeches at that time. He said, if you are an Iraqi worker and you go, let's say, and you want to get married, once the family hear that you are a worker, they will not accept you as husband of their daughter, whatever. They think your social standing is low, you don't have enough money, to secure whatever the life. So he said, if we make the Iraqi worker a public employee, he's not a worker anymore, he's a public employee, then he has claim for, pensions, higher wages, better social standing, and so on. We knew, or at least I think I knew, what he was aiming at. And it was a clever move by the Ba'athists. On the one hand, it's true, it appeals to the Iraqi working class, a better social standing, better wages, better pensions, etc. So to win their support, right, to abandon the Communist Party. But the objective was, and I sensed this at that time, is to argue that, okay, if we don't have worker anymore, they are public employee, then there is no need for a trade union to represent worker. Right? So he wanted to get rid of the trade union or push them to be part of the state apparatus, or the Ba'athist state apparatus, by saying, look, you don't have social basis anymore, so you might as well become part of the states, right?
So in 1980, when the war breaks out with Iran,
Yes.
There's not that level of hatred against Saddam that comes later because there's still this welfare state and the Ba'ath Party still represents that?
Not only that.
Because why do people fight in such numbers and get killed in such numbers against Iran?
Not only that. During the war, what the Ba'athists did, they increased the social spending. They increased the benefit. So if you have a brother or a father or a member of the family killed in the war, you will get a car from the state. You will get, I think, something around $10,000 as a compensation. You get a lot of benefits. So to most of these families who lost, the loved one, they were compensated in a way. So people felt, there is some sort of obligation of the government and the state towards the families and so on.
But they considered, how did they sell that Iran was a threat?
Well, when I said that the Shia communities in Iraq sided with Saddam and the Ba'athists against the Iranian, because, in the 1970s, the biggest chunk of the Shia community were either Ba'athist or communist. They were not sectarian. So they were either Iraqi nationalists and they joined the Ba'ath Party.
Why would Shia communists be in favor of this war?
No, the communists, no. As I said, they were massacred, imprisoned, and so on. That were the Shiite nationalists, the Iraqi nationalists. So most of the Shiite were Iraqi nationalists, and they were in the Ba'ath Party. And I showed in one of my essays on Iraq after the occupation, when I was in Germany, that up to 65 or 67% of the leadership of the Ba'ath Party was Shiite, not Sunni. So the narrative after the occupation that somehow the Sunni used to rule and the Shiite were victim is false. Statistically, historically, and socially, it's not right? That's why the Ba'athists were capable of appealing to the Shiite community, because most of the Shiite active segment of the population were Ba'athists, member of the Ba'ath Party.
In 1982, 2 years after the war, you finish high school, you're eligible to get into the army, and you leave.
I left the country, but I left illegally in a way, because it was impossible to leave Iraq during the war if you are 18 and above, because they need you to go to the army. So you have to be smuggled out of Iraq.
How were you smuggled out?
Well, that's one of the irony of time. My brother was in prison, and he was tortured at that time. And the guy who used to torture my brother for 9 months, he started sympathizing with my brother because he realized, well, the guy was a communist. And I thought all the time that the communists, they were, a satellite for the Soviet Union. They are not Iraqi nationals and so on.
This is what the Guard says.
Yeah, exactly. He thought, the communists are against Iraq, against whatever. They serve the Soviet Union. But after torturing my brother for a month, he realized, well, he's just like Iraqi nationalists like him, but he happened to be on the side of the Communist Party, right? So then this officer told my brother, okay, I tortured you for 9 months. I want to do you a favor. What kind of favor do you want from me? He said, you know what? I have a younger brother, my youngest brother, and I don't want him to be in this war. If you can help him leave the country, that's the biggest favor you can do. He said, okay.
And
So he
you
came
go
to
back
me.
and torture him again?
No, he didn't.
Torture
he didn't
was
torture
over
him.
by then.
He moved him from this torture cell to a normal prison. So he didn't torture him anymore. So then he came to me one night in a car with his own driver.
The guard.
The officer, yeah. And he was a pretty much feared person in the South. Just by saying his name, you start shivering. One of the biggest torturer in the region at that time. So that's the irony of the whole story. The same guy who tortures my brother came to my house in the night with his driver. He told me, how much time do you need to pack your stuff? I said, I don't have any stuff. He said, okay, anytime you're ready, tell me, I can bring you, across the border. So he told me, where do you want to go? At that time, my brother, my older brother, another older brother, and my mother used to live in Kuwait, which is next to Basra. I told him, well, maybe want to go to Kuwait. He said, okay, I'll come by tomorrow morning, I'll pick you up, I'll make sure you will cross the border. And he did it. So, and I start thinking about this in the sense of even within the most rigid apparatus of the state, the security apparatus, the intelligence, right? Sometimes specific moment can lead to, a change in the consciousness of those who torture you or survey you and so on, right? So one shouldn't disregard the potential even within the most rigid apparatus of the state, the security apparatus. And the example of Venezuela is an excellent one. You have the army actually pursuing one of the most progressive projects in the history of Venezuela, and the Chavez, right? So again, this is, I think, one of my understanding of the Marxist theory, especially Marxist state theory, to look at every institution as a contradictory, conflictual one, not something settled, homogeneous, taken for granted, but there are always potential of disruption, tension, and so on.
Snowden's and whatever.
Yes, exactly. So even again, at that time, with this, the most scary part of the security apparatus, the intelligence, the mukhabarat, they are even more worse than other, part of the security apparatus. Even there, you can see some sort of tension, change, etc.
Just quickly to finish the story, how long is, then eventually you wind up in Canada?
Well, before Canada, when I went to the Gulf, into Kuwait, I stayed for a while, and then I moved to Europe. And I moved actually to Russia at that time because I have a lot of friends in Russia, and to Leningrad at that time. They used to call it Leningrad. Now it's Petersburg, St. Petersburg. From Moscow to Leningrad, and then I moved from there. I couldn't stay there. I moved to Poland. I lived for a while in Poland, tried to study there, and it didn't work too. And then I moved to England, to London. So I was on both sides of the Iron Curtain at that time. I couldn't afford studying in England, and then one day I found myself in Germany, and for not for political or whatever reason, but actually for personal one. At that time, I met a woman. She was from Germany. She was in London. We fell in love. And then she looked me in the eye. She said, "Why don't we go to Germany?" I said, "Yes, I'm convinced." I went to Germany, and I had no clue where I'm going. I didn't speak German. But I found myself in Germany. But I told her one thing: look, if we go to Germany, then we go to Frankfurt. Because when I was in Iraq, it's among all the lefties, especially in the Middle East, is the Frankfurt school and the critical Marxist tradition is heavily present in Frankfurt and in Institute for Social Research. I said, if we go to Germany, then to Frankfurt. She said, yeah, okay. So I ended up in Frankfurt doing my with a delay of almost 10 years, my undergrad, my grad, my PhD, start teaching in Frankfurt before I moved to Canada 10 years ago.
And what happens to your brother?
Well, I haven't seen him ever since. I remember him calling me.
Never seen him since then?
No, because I didn't go to Iraq anymore. At that time, again, I was against the Ba'athists. I was against Saddam Hussein. And after 2003, I was against the war, against the occupation of Iraq, because I knew it was not about the Ba'athists or Saddam, because there were no Ba'athists anymore in 2003. So I knew it's about Iraq, destruction of Iraq and so on. And I was against the occupation and against the so-called Iraqi exile opposition, those who were arguing for the occupation of Iraq. I was against them too. That's why there was a lot of campaign against me, accusing me of being a Ba'athist, and I come from a communist family, or accusing me of being a Sunni, but actually my fathers were Shiite. So you have all this kind of accusation just because I was against the occupation. They could not, understand why. American occupation. Why I was arguing neither for Saddam Hussein nor for the U.S., but for a social revolution in Iraq. I said the Iraqi people are so devastated by the sanction and so on. We can organize a change from within Iraq. You don't need the U.S. or any of the power to do it.
What happened to your brother?
Well, the thing is, as I said, he called me. He was in prison in 1990, 1991. But when the spontaneous revolt happened in 1991, people freed all the prisoners from prison in Iraq. He called me at that time. He said, "I'm free now." I was in Germany at that time. He said, "I'm free now. I'll talk to you later. Let's see how things will settle. If there's a real change, and the Ba'athists are gone, so I'm here." But then I haven't heard anything from him anymore because, as I said, it went the other way. That means the Ba'athists took over again. So he fled the country, and he went to Iran, to Al-Ahwaz and Muhammara, which is where you have the Arabic communities living there, right? And I remember my father used to have a relative there. So my brother went there, and he called me from there. He said, "I'm here. Things went totally wrong. These, militias, sectarian militias of Al-Badr, of Al-Hakim, they came and they destroyed everything in a way. Now I am here." And then I said, I'll catch up with you later. But he didn't. So ever since, I don't know where he is and so on. And I didn't go back to Iraq because, as I said, after the occupation, I was not only against the occupation, but was against the whole, edifice that the United States put in place and the political class and so on.
And your father?
My father died when I was still a kid, heart attack. So my mother was actually in charge for all of us, and I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters, so there were 9 of us. Only my mother, a poor family at that time, and there were no social safety networks and so at the end of the 60s, so she has to work, clean, cook, bring her to school, do everything by herself.
You told me smoke cigarettes.
I smoke cigarettes. She smoked 2 packs a day. But I always, one of the things...
But she never connected again with you?
No, my mother, she calls me.
With your brother, never connected?
No, that's why we don't know. But, one of the things there are many things I appreciate about this woman, my mother, because until today, I don't know how she managed to raise 9 kids alone without any income, work, clean, everything by herself. It's insane. But one other thing, I remember, it was in 1984. I was sleeping, and she woke me up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she told me, and she's really very...
Like in Kuwait? Or?
Yeah, in Kuwait. And she's really very dedicated, Muslim woman. She goes to Mecca, to Hajj, and so on. It's fine. And she knew I'm a Marxist. She thinks I'm crazy, but it's okay.
But she married a Marxist.
Yeah, exactly. But, still she was, religious, but still, she has no problem with communists or whatever. And that's what I'm saying. Iraq was completely different than what was presented after 2003. All the communities were mixed, like Shia, Sunni, Christian, Muslim, and so on, socially speaking, right? So what happens, she woke me up in the morning, at 6 in the morning, and she started shouting at me. "Are you still sleeping?" And I was saying, "Why?" She said, "You're sleeping and your people are getting massacred." I said, "What?" So she showed me the newspaper where the Reagan administration was supporting the Contra against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, because she knew I supported the Sandinistas, right? And she was really, not into politics.
She meant by your people, the Sandinistas.
The Sandinistas, right? So, I was amazed. 6 o'clock in the morning, and she woke me up because of that. That means, you can see, there is no contradiction between being religious or something, and yet having, politically speaking, a very progressive positioning and so on. There is no contradiction in that. That's why I always criticize some tendency within the left to have this modernist dichotomy between secular and religious. Somehow the secular are good and the religious are bad. Reality is not like that. You have dictators among the seculars like Saddam Hussein or Assad, right? Butchers. And you have wonderful revolutionary among the religious people, right? If you look at Iraq, for instance, now, you can see on both sides On the religious side, the Shiite parties align with the US, but you have a Sadrist movement, on the other hand, much more Iraqi nationalists against the occupation and so on. So this sense of having all religious figures in one basket and assuming they are all the same, they are all ISIS, or they are all the Muslim Brotherhood, or they are all this and that, never actually have any relation to reality on the ground. And that's why one has to be very cautious, not least for political reason, because once you start organizing and protesting against, I don't know, the government in Iraq or in Egypt or whatever, you need to know who your allies are, which group in the society you can rely on, and so on. If you make this simplistic scenario of good and bad, you will not achieve anything.
Right. Okay, in the next segment of our interview, we're going to pick up on the conversation of what might come next in Iraq. Now, Sabah's story, we could keep going for quite a while because it's fascinating, but we're actually just like running out of time given today how much we can do. So I hope we can kind of pick up more of the personal narrative later. But we're going to pick up on obviously oil and what the American strategy might be for Iraq now. So please join us for the what will be the final segment of at least this series with Sabah Alnasseri on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.